in San Francisco, and very determined to see the success of that, and that they've spent quite a bit of time in the Mediterranean area. The results of that venture are what they are going to share with us tonight. Before they talk, I would like to make sure that you all understand that it is their exhibit in the hall outside in the exhibit space, and that after the talk and question session here, Steve and Kathy would very much like to adjourn to the exhibit area and have an informal discussion time with those of you who are interested. So I think that will be a real treat. Steve and Kathy House.
Can everybody hear me? Up there? Okay, good. Thank you very much, Paul. We want to say how pleased we are to be with you here tonight. This is our first time to Muncie, Indiana. We have had a delightful time today walking through the studios and meeting the different professors. And it's just a real delight for us to be able to share our experiences with you. And everyone here has just been very, very kind to us. So we want to thank you for your hospitality. The architecture building that you're working in, it's a very unique space, and one which I think that many of you find quite inspirational to work in. And what we're here to talk with you about tonight is finding inspiration in your surroundings, whether it's here in school or wherever you may be in the world. And our example this evening will be specifically the world of Mediterranean villages. It's a world that has taught us to see architecture with new vision. And before we begin, we thought that you might be interested in knowing how we became involved in this study in the first place. Frankly, it happened by chance. In 1975, Kathy and I had recently finished school, and we decided that we wanted to go to Europe and travel, like I'm sure many of you have or intend to. And we decided to travel really intensely for 2 months all through Central Europe and Northern Europe. And at the end of that time, 2 months on a very intense Eurail pass, we were quite exhausted and decided that we needed some time just to relax. So we thought that why not just go to a Greek island for a week or two and just rest. So while we were in Athens, we had no idea which island to go to or to explore. And in our hotel room that very first night in Athens, we saw a picture on the wall which caught our eye, and we said, this is the most fantastic place we've ever seen. And we asked the hotel manager, where is this island? And he says, oh, you don't want to go there. It's a long boat ride. And we say, no, we're going there. So the next morning, which happened to be 2 days before Christmas, we got on a boat and took a 13-hour boat ride to the island of Santorini. And we arrived at 10 p.m. in the evening after 13 hours of freezing rain on a boat full of herds of goats and chickens, and all the Greek people who lived in Athens were all coming home to spend time with their relatives for Christmas. But as soon as we got off that boat, we knew immediately that we had stumbled into someplace very, very magical. In our first hour there, in trying to find a hotel room for the evening, we discovered some of the most beautiful stair conditions and window conditions that we'd ever seen. We had no idea that we were in a place this beautiful. Because it was wintertime, all the hotels were unfortunately closed for the winter. So after quite a bit of exploring, we found a house that was perched on the top of a 1,000-foot high cliff. It was 3,000 square feet with 20-foot high vaulted ceilings. And we were able to rent that house for $1.50 a day. So the landlord thought he was getting a deal. So we immediately gave him $45 and said, "We'll take it for the month." And he said, "Fine." We had gone there for a rest, but we're so excited the entire time that we were there that we could hardly ever sleep. It was like being in a full-scale study model, exploring all aspects of form and texture and light and movement. And by living in one of these traditional houses, we soon became to realize how intelligently the villagers had provided for so many of the quality that architecture today lacks. The house that we lived in had practically no electricity, and our water supply consisted of a bucket and a 600-year-old cistern outside. But that house was one of the most civilized houses that we had ever lived in. And the longer that we were there, the more we understood it and the more excited that we became. And I look back and we went there for a week and we ended up staying there for 4 months. And we spent the whole time just sketching and photographing and documenting each of the villages on the island. And the architecture was so simple, but it was more profound than we had ever imagined that it would be. So in 1982, we decided to go back to continue our study. And during that time, we spent 9 months documenting village architecture in 4 regions: Spain, Yugoslavia, Greece, and Italy. And when we returned to San Francisco, we opened our own office, and the very first project that we did was to take the hundreds of drawings and photographs that we had produced during these trips and try to put them into the exhibit that's currently on display in your gallery now. But we're hardly the first to realize the value of this unspoiled architecture. Even Frank Lloyd Wright said in 1910 that the true basis for any serious study of the art of architecture still lies in those indigenous, more humble dwellings everywhere that are to architecture what folklore is to literature or folk song to music. And Le Corbusier's respect and deep understanding of the Mediterranean villages is very evident in much of his work, and he just masterfully absorbed the elements into his designs. Also, American architect Myron Goldfinger, whose early book, Villages in the Sun, which was one of our early inspirations, he said, "In our search to improve our conditions, we may still look for spiritual guidance to the towns and villages of the Mediterranean. They have achieved a place for human experience, a rich variety of forms and spaces in which to live, and a structural framework that permits the expression of the individual and the participation of the many." And in our slides today, we will explore several villages in these regions and many of the details that contribute so highly to the livability and charm. We will look at siding and massing and circulation, windows, balconies, and drains, and all the specific structures and elements that contribute so much to these beautiful villages. And for our conclusion, we have prepared a 15-minute presentation of the elements and music of Greece. And like Paul said, at the end of the show, we'll be happy to meet with any of you in the gallery and discuss any questions or anything that you might have about our work. So I'll get the lights here and we can start.
Can you hear me? Okay. Go.
Yeah.
This is Metora in north-central Greece. The siding is the most dominant characteristic of these centuries-old monasteries. They're built high on rock pinnacles. You can't hear me. I don't know what to do about it.
Well, speak up as loud as you can. Try there.
Can you hear me now? No. I can try yelling.
Probably if you just hold it.
All right.
Can you hold it?
How about that? All right. These monasteries, 800-year-old monasteries, were built high on rock pinnacles for isolation and protection. As you look at them, you can see that they are in harmony with their landscape. I think there are two basic approaches to siting. One is organic, where the buildings blend with and become part of their environment, and the other is articulated, where the buildings are set apart from their environment, either through form or color, and they tend to dominate. But in both cases, the forms of the buildings should follow and respect the configuration of the site, and thereby create a distinct yet harmonious relationship with the land. As you can see, these intricate silhouettes are in harmony, and they even accentuate the landscape.
It's focusing, right?
Is it focusing?
Is the slide on the right focus? Yeah,
In the south of Spain, the town of Montefrio is set like a jewel in a sea of olive trees. Gentle rows of houses terrace the slopes of a massive rock outcropping, which is crowned with the fortress church. A distinctive silhouette is typical of these villages throughout the Mediterranean and help gives each town visual distinction. The abstract geometry of the repetitive elements is enhanced by the sensuous textures of the roofs and weathered walls. And I think here it's interesting to see the geometry of the earth repeated in the waves of tawny tiles. The overall composition of Montefrio on the left is not unlike Ios on the island of Greece, on the island of Ios in Greece. The graceful forms of these villages are enhanced by the respect that the builders showed when they sited the buildings. This is San Stefano in Italy. From a distance, it looks like the classic fairy tale village, with gray stone houses clustered around a tall cylindrical tower. This is Miranda, also in Italy. It's situated in an amphitheater-shaped outcropping of rock that projects above the dense forest on the mountain which it's built. Not far from Miranda is Pescia. You can see here the gray stone houses blend into the mountainside to which they cling.
Stop. Excuse me, I want to reorganize this because there's a lot of... Does this help at all? Because there's a lot of light on that left slide from here. Is that any better? A little bit more. It's real dark. Okay. Is that any better? Okay.
It's dark in here. As you look at these slides here, well, you can see that sometimes the buildings are so much a part of their environment that they are just very much a natural part of it. As you look at these are slides of the Atlas Mountains in Morocco and Egypt will follow in the Peloponnese, just a few slides to go through here. What we wanted you to look at and think about is that the scale of these villages is very much the same size as a standard American apartment complex. Same number of residents, similar number of buildings. Yet in our own American suburban complexes, we rarely see towns achieve such visual identity. Then there are some towns that have particularly unique siting. This one, as you can see, is very well integrated into the site. This is the town of Setonil, which is built into the cleft, which is dug into the hillside by the river. They use the overhanging rock of the mountain for their roofs. Also in the southern part of Spain, in a region that can be extremely inhospitable, hollowing into the earth can have many advantages, not the least of which is cool shelter. These are the caves of Guadix, which have been occupied since prehistoric times. Though primitive in nature, these caves offer very civilized shelter. The use of light and ventilation shafts and the heavy use of whitewash to reflect light deep into the interior minimizes the feeling that they're caves at all once you're inside. While the inhabitants sit there quietly watching TV, the thermal mass of the earth itself protects them from the heat. And they relax without having to worry about equipment failure or energy bills. Sometimes the site is so dramatically beautiful that the village becomes mere decoration, like snowfall on a mountain ridge. This is the island of Santorini. This is the island that we went to for a week, that we stayed on for a month, that we loved, and that this is where we really began our study of Mediterranean villages. These are the towering cliffs here, are the inner crater of an ancient volcano. This is the village of Fira, very near where the house was that we rented. Fira is a cliff village on the left, and we've compared it here with Caceres in the south of Spain, that the way the villagers have climbed the mountains and sited their village is very similar, both achieving beautiful composition of form. Also here, this is Fira on the left again, and we're comparing it with Positano on the Amalfi Coast of Italy on the right, where you can see a repetition of form and composition in the archways and the dome churches. It's interesting to look at this slide on the left is a cutaway view of one of the villages on Santorini, provided by a 1956 earthquake. And what you realize when you see this is that although the village appears to be built onto the cliff, it is in fact built into the cliff, not so unlike the caves of Guadix on the right. Water, of course, is always an interesting addition to any site. It can provide isolation for the lonely chapel, or just a wonderful base for a village that appears to float, as on the right, the island of Premosten off the coast of Yugoslavia. The two towns compared here are Piran on the left, on the Istrian coast of Yugoslavia, and Mykonos on the right. Both of these towns project into and embrace the sea. Both of them are built on relatively flat, unprotected sites. Both of them built in their protection by creating a maze of their streets to foil the invaders. The quay becomes the heart of the city, and as the sea comes into the life of the village, it affects the village form, it affects the structure of the community life. I think what we're trying to show as we talk about siting here is that these towns undoubtedly prove that the undulations of the land can be strikingly accentuated by the addition of man-made modifications. Color, texture, form, contrast, all can work in close harmony with the land. They can express unique identity, yet be in scale with both the land and the inhabitants. The spirit of place and community is fully expressed here. When we look at these, we realize that community architecture is not so much an individual art, but a collective art. And I think the challenge is to maintain the necessary variations within the context of the whole. What we're showing here is just a student housing project by DiCarlo in the town of Urbino, as we thought an interesting example of his response to the site.
A closer look at the facades clearly weaves the urban fabric of each village. The common life requirements of each of the inhabitants is emphasized by the similarity of materials and repetitions of form. Yet the interplay of light and shadow, the layering of texture, the geometric compositions all reveal the individual identities of each house within the context of the entire community. In most of the Mediterranean houses, they take a form of connected units. Repetition without monotony is characteristic of these villages. Variation has replaced repetition. Individual needs have inspired changes in the standard unit and have transformed a simple geometry into a complex pattern. Even when the dwellings lack an apparent coherent pattern, they are united by similarities. Tiled roofs and whitewashed walls and materials are abundant in these areas. As population demands increase and housing on a large scale becomes more and more necessary, repetition and standardization will become the natural course. Whether the result is satisfying communities in scale with and responding to the inhabitants, or the endless monotony that is so common in our suburban neighborhoods, will depend on the sensitivity of the architects. Form is highly articulated throughout the Mediterranean regions and becomes more and more plastic and fluid in the southern extremes. These thick-walled stones and their small openings lend a monolithic quality to each of the individual buildings. The sculptural forms of the roof, chimneys, stairs, and other building elements is emphasized by the brilliant whitewash and the rich texture of the plaster. The facades of these series of houses in Mykonos present a great similarity in their dimensions, articulation. The individual houses, though unique, contribute to the uniform, harmonious whole. All of these villages are very beautiful and each has its own unique characteristics, but some are certainly more unique than in others. The town of Alberobello in southern Italy is a forest of black conical roofs. Built entirely of unmortared limestone, each thick-walled room has its own conical trullo roof. Each house is a conglomeration of sizes and shapes. Originally an agricultural structure, the countryside is dotted with hundreds of beautiful Trulli farmhouses. In a region so remote that each town maintains its own individual dialect, mysterious pagan symbols have survived from ancient times and are still used as decoration on the roofs of many of these Trullis. The sensuous forms become very organic and sculptural. Small windows are typical for protection from the hot sun, and the heavy use of whitewash reflects light deep into the houses. The ancient construction methods continue to be used, as you see in these new Trulli roofs. Even in more conventional construction, something of the traditional form persists. As you see on the left, a bit of a trullo form on a flat roof, and on the right, an inverted trullo construction on a conventional pitched roof. Evidence of their widespread influence can also be seen in this Victorian development in San Francisco on the right.
If we isolate a piece of wall and examine it out of context, we suddenly can see that it is alive with color, texture, form, pattern. Even in the most crude construction, the walls come alive with an abstract composition of light and shadow, textures and form. Walls are the fabric of the town, and it's the opening in the walls that create the character of that fabric. Whether the walls are built of cut or rough stone, plastered, painted, new or old, the window offers an opportunity to articulate the surface in a meaningful way. Even these windows in very poor villages in the Atlas Mountains of Morocco have a distinct statement and character of them. The use of grills and color offer the individuals the opportunity to express themselves. And even extremes like this work within the overall town form. Windows reflect the need for light and ventilation. They appear only when necessary and are positioned by sun orientation and wind direction. The relation of the window to the street enhances social interaction. Most windows are simple. Occasionally, decorative surrounds emphasize a particular building or family, or maybe just reflect part of their history in the style of a former conqueror. The Venetian influence is clearly evident here in the windows on the left, which are in a very remote town in Italy, and even in the windows on the right, which are on Santorini in Greece. Windows often provide the only applied color on a surface of natural materials, or if color is common, they offer the chance to articulate it. Either way, they're a source for decoration and ornamentation. We thought these were interesting to note. The one on the left is from a very, very remote village in Italy, and the one on the right is from a brand new restaurant in San Francisco. Sometimes it's only the sun and a vine on a trellis or a simple geranium in the window that can provide all the decoration you need for a surface. Or maybe it's just a pleasant composition of materials that respond directly to the individual situation. Where shutters are very common in the Eastern Mediterranean, iron grills are more common in the Western countries. In their most utilitarian nature, they function to keep intruders out. Or they might, like this birdcage, keep someone in. Sometimes these cages become quite elaborate, as these grills on windows in the south of Spain. Balconies are common throughout the Mediterranean countries, reflecting the need for private outdoor space. Even in housing that's as dense as some of our own urban centers, almost everyone has a space to step outside. Sometimes the balconies are so tiny that there's just that space to step outside, but even still, the balcony offers the opportunity to be outdoors that a window does not. Railings are typically wood or metal. They're always a source for decoration and color, whether they're painted or just alive with potted plants. Doors are also a source for color and articulation. These are in northern Morocco. As we spent time in the Mediterranean, we started to realize that there was a natural color scheme to the environment that those countries share. And the same colors kept popping up. As here you see, on the left is a very remote village on a really obscure island in Greece. And on the right is equally remote village in Spain. The forms that the openings take are always a direct response to the immediate situation, whether it's a wide opening over a door to reflect light into the vaulted ceiling, or a small opening to keep out the sun. And it's also interesting to note how the sun provides a wonderful, constantly changing decoration on the simple wall by the shadow of the roof across the street. Construction is always simple, appropriate to the materials. As with the windows, occasional decorative surrounds provide a touch of history or grandeur. Sometimes it's the most simple solutions that can inspire us the most. As you see here, a simple projection into the street that's angled to catch the light to reflect it into a lower room also provides an interesting articulation to the street as well as a seat for the weary walker. Even drains can become delightful elements. The crudeness of these constructions should not prevent us from seeing in them some interesting ideas. Sirt's work is obviously reflective of his influence of the Mediterranean. And here you can see that his rainwater solution on the Mate Museum in the south of France creates a temporary cascade into a lily pond. Corbusier carried the idea to an even greater level, making a powerful statement out of something that we so often treat like nothing more than the necessary collection and discharge of sewage. Chimneys, too, offer the opportunity to create beautiful sculptural elements. The form and style varies from village to village. Often the cross-vaulted or vaulted form reflects the typical house construction. These are a necessary function that has become more. They are sculpture. They give us pleasure. Why do our own chimneys so often do less? Buttressing is common in Greece to resist earthquake forces. Even in these are in Italy, even in tiny alleyways, something of the grandeur of the Gothic cathedral can be felt. Arches are a soft, caressing form. They give you protection, and they invite your spirit to soar in the narrow alleyways. They can also become very intriguing sculptural elements. Arched forms are typical throughout the Mediterranean. They separate light from shadow. They enclose and open. They control your progression and your vista. They offer protection and relief. They define your direction, and they momentarily frame segments of the environment, transforming them into beautiful compositions.
Now we're going to change carousels. You're doing great. The space between the buildings, the pedestrian streets, determine the character of the town more than any other single element. The plan of the town reveals a sophisticated network of communication and resultant sequence of spatial experience. The streets have a flowing sculptural quality. They provide the intimacy of protective enclosure and the exhilaration of dynamic open space, creating a variety of spatial contrasts. Despite the different types of street layout, the overall plan is always coherent and uniform in character. Streets are typically narrow and widen into complex squares, usually at intersections. This is Dubrovnik's magnificent main street, Plaka. Once a canal, but long ago filled in and paved, this street is the heart of the city. More like a long, narrow plaza, Plaka flows through the city, nourishing all the public spaces with a natural flow of human life. Throughout the Mediterranean, protection from the sun is a primary factor in the characteristic of the streets, whether it be awnings or just simple trellises. The results are always pleasant, both visually and physically. The contrast between the discomfort of our modern streets and the comfort of so-called primitive streets can be illustrated with these canopied streets in Morocco. In the southern regions of our own country, the blazing summer sun can be as unbearable as it is here. Yet here we run from air-conditioned space to air-conditioned space while our streets are like ovens. There, as Bernard Rudofsky so well described it, filtered sunlight trickles down from the canopies, weaving patterns across the pavement and showering sequins upon the milling crowd. The lacy trellises of reeds and woven mats glow like so many chandeliers, transforming miles of streets into luminous corridors. They have tamed the sun's fireworks into noiseless sparks, beams and sheafs of light, scattered flights of luminous arrows. The streets also provide a strong variety of impressions with sudden changes from light to shade. These streets are designed for people, whether intimate or protective, or grand and exhilarating. They respond to the needs and comfort of people. It is the habit of the human body to relate itself to the environment. There is a typical emotional reaction to position. This reaction cannot be ignored and should become a factor in the design of the environment. The feeling of orientation is also intensified by the perspectives. The flow and movement is natural and enhanced by drawing the eye to a vanishing point or points of orientation. The three-dimensional or sculptural quality of the street is also underscored by the manner in which the houses contribute a fascinating array of stairs, balconies, and terraces. In Greece, anything that can extend into the street normally does. "500 years ago," Alberti said, it will be better not for the streets to run straight, but to have them wind about like the course of a river. Besides appearing so much longer, they will add to the idea of greatness of the town. They will likewise be more beautiful and convenient. This winding of the streets will make the passenger at every step discover a new structure. There will be no house but what, in some part of the day, will enjoy some sun, nor will they be without gentle breezes. And yet they will not be molested by stormy blasts, because such will be broken by the turning of the streets. A street can also be so much more than just straight lines of endless vistas that we are so accustomed to here in this country. A meandering street can manipulate you through a sequence of spaces. It controls your view and enhances your sense of progression. In architecture, stairs can be a wonderful visual element. By their width, arrangement, materials, and detailing, they express the character and quality of the environment and its attitude towards people. The street is also enriched by the modulation of exterior stairs. It's also enriched by the occasional bridges and tunnels. Communal interaction is encouraged by the linked terraces and proximity of stairs and balconies to the street. Families have privacy, yet easily participate in the activity of the street. Stairs give scale. Their dimensions are so familiar that we instantly comprehend the size of everything around them. They explain and diagram your movement, and by their steepness and layout, they control your speed and rhythm. In Greece, the stairs are very organic, almost sculptural. The function of changing levels is always the primary goal, yet the forms that follow reflect an extraordinary range of architectural languages, each proclaiming the culture of its users. The stair on the right is particularly intriguing. By building the stairs in this manner, you achieve twice the rise and half the run. They are almost as steep as a ladder, yet extremely comfortable to use. The only requirement is that you start off on the right foot. This is another interesting idea on the left. When it rains, the water creates a wonderful cascading waterfall beside the stairs. And on the right, Paul Rudolph was able to achieve a similar quality of experience in his stairs at the Boston Government Center. Complex stair configurations are common, whether to individual dwellings or just a part of the street. By comparison, our own streets and stairs are somewhat timid. It's the architect's responsibility to consider more than what the code requires and to articulate their designs to provide genuinely meaningful space. It's interesting to compare this street in Mykonos on the left with Halpern's Fountain in Portland on the right. And Arthur Erickson certainly achieved an intriguing solution to stairs and ramp and public space in his law courts building in Vancouver.
We've been looking at a world created by people. What we want to do now is look at who these people are, who have sited their communities so beautifully, who have achieved such harmony between man-made and natural environments, who take delight in forming rainwater drains and chimneys into sculpture, who texture their world with fantastic patterns and turn harsh sun into crystal and chandeliers. They are not architects. They've not been trained as designers. Yet when they build, they do it with sensitivity and common sense. They demonstrate a unique richness of design, technical ingenuity, and subtle creativity. Their work arouses our spirits. Even Adlai Stevenson noted, "In quiet places, reason abounds. In quiet people, there is a vision and purpose. That many things are revealed to the humble, that are hidden from the great." We are so used to believing in the supremacy of modern architecture that we tend to overlook how people of these traditional communities resolved architectural problems with intelligence and imagination. I think the study of these villages offers us an exceptional opportunity to examine contained communities similar in size to our own suburban and urban neighborhoods. Comparing their world to our own can remind us that the targets we should set for ourselves, if we're to aim towards a better future, include harmony, peace, and beauty. Man's physical and psychological needs for shelter, privacy, social interaction, light, air, and warmth will persist no matter how sophisticated our technology may become. Winston Churchill once said, "First, we shape our buildings, and afterwards, our buildings shape us." It's our hope that what we share with you today will inspire in you the desire to see beyond the surface, beyond our own cultural groundings, beyond our vision of what architecture should be, and to start to look at the world around us as one of our best resources for design ideas. So what we're suggesting by these slides and by our study is that we just pause in our race to the future and look to the world around us, to the wisdom of the world, and see if we can find in it any ideas worth pursuing any further.
Thank you very much. If anybody has any questions or anything, they could either ask us now or we can go into the exhibit area if you'd like. Yes, John? Yes, it is. Exactly. That's correct.
She asked that we said the house we stayed on in Greece was one of the most civilized houses we'd ever stayed in, even though it had barely any electricity and just a rainwater cistern for water supply. All right, yeah, Stephen says, maybe I should tell you a little preface to that, that we had been traveling in the winter, and we'd been traveling through Central Europe. They were having the worst winter they had had in years. I am not a person who goes camping. I cannot stand to be inconvenienced. And all through Europe, nobody had heat. Nobody that wasn't hot water. I wasn't accustomed to it, and I was being very inconvenienced. And when we got to Greece and we decided to rent the house, I actually wrote a list of requirements that the house had to have hot water, it had to have running water, it had to have a refrigerator, it had to have heat above all, and et cetera. And I had this list. And even as we went to meet the person who was going to show us the house, I was saying, now you know, we're going to have all these things in this house, or I'm not going to stay in it, because I'm just not going to I'm not going to do it. So we got to this house.
And my first impression, I was so overwhelmed by the forms of the ceiling. It had 20-foot vaulted ceilings, cross-vaulted in the center. It was a disaster when we saw it. He had been keeping mules in there and sprouting onions, so it smelled and what have you. But even as I saw it, I knew there was something special there. And I just, and Stephen was saying, well, no, we can't have this house because it doesn't have any of these things. And I'm saying, no, no, we've got to have this house now. And then we got into a big argument with the person there, and he didn't speak in English. We were speaking in charades anyway. And we took the house. And I still don't know what caught my attention at the time, because it took us a little time of being there. Things that we started to notice about it was that simple things. The house faced west. There was a cliff behind it. It got sun late in the day, but even still, by 8 o'clock in the morning, by the shape of the forms that were on the terrace, by the vaulted ceiling, by the whitewash, and we only had 2 tiny windows in our main room that was 50 feet deep. Even still, by 8 o'clock in the morning, the room was entirely lit, and you didn't have to have any electricity on. You could sit in the back and read. More important, we started to notice how we had a huge terrace in the front of the house, and 3/4 of that terrace was completely private. And it took us a little time to realize that as the toilet was outside underneath the stairs. You had to, when you woke up in the morning, go out onto the terrace, feeling that all the people in the village could see you, because their houses were on top of yours and all on top of each other all around your house. And so you kind of sneak out in the morning, hoping that everybody in town's not watching you, trek to the toilet. And after a while, you started to realize, and you started to know, and you'd look behind and see that no one could see you. And so we started, that was the first thing that started us on this study, because we decided to cut a section through the whole cliff there and study the angles, the view angles and the setbacks. And we got so excited when we discovered how the zones worked, how the private zone and the semi-private and then the public zones, and how the circulation past the house worked, and how you could communicate with your neighbors by your own choice. And we started thinking, this is wonderful. So we ran around and started discovering all of this about other houses as well, other things that were just, you think here, any apartment complex is just as densely built here, but you don't have that kind of sensitivity, and you don't have that kind of privacy. You don't have the designer responding to your personal needs that way. And we just got very excited by that. Nothing else?
Well, first of all, we went in the wintertime. We arrived on the island of Santorini 2 days before Christmas, purposely to avoid tourists, because in the summertime, it's just swamped with people. So the purpose of the slides, particularly in the beginning of the show, were to concentrate on the elements, not the people. So what we did is we did wait for certain parts of the day and when people went by, so that we could concentrate primarily on the elements. But also in the slideshow, you did see a specific area where we said, all right, okay, let's go out and just do the people this day. So we wanted to keep a distinct separation between the people and then the architecture that we were focusing on.
We have not seen any slides of any interior. Was it intentional?
Was intentional? Not really, no. What we tried to do with the interior spaces, which you'll see in some of the photographs and drawings in the exhibit, is that we did drawings on the inside. At that time, we, pardon me?
I wanted to respond to that too, because when we first started doing this, we thought, I mean, we studied architecture. We think we're architects. We're going to go and study the architecture. And the more we studied these villages, the more we realized that architecture has a lot more to do with the planning than we had ever considered. And suddenly, the village house is very simple. And there are certainly wonderful specific elements that you can explore about it. Things, the way they funnel light through windows and the way they just deal with form and that. But the structure of the house itself inside is very different from our own culture and not necessarily something that we can learn directly from. And we started spending more and more time in the outdoor spaces, in the streets. How did they articulate their streets? How do the streets run through? How do their public spaces work? How does the community structure work? How do people, where do they interact with each other? How do they interact? How is space provided for that? And suddenly we realized that planning and the street and the landscape and the texture of the walls and the pavement of the street pattern and all of that is very, very much a part of architecture. And I think that that's one of the real eye-openers. And the reason then that we don't show too much of the interiors, because I think very specifically that there's not as much opportunity for all of us to learn from what they've done there in the interiors of their house. Because the interiors are far more alien to our own culture than the exteriors. And we can walk down a street if it's a wonderful street, and we can say, this is a wonderful street, and you can come home and do it. And you can understand why it works and how you react to it. I think that's really why we started. Just as the more we looked at it, the more we realized that was what we could learn. But you see, that's where the mistake is that you don't go there to see what it looks like and bring back what it looks like. You, right. So you don't, it doesn't, to build a village that you can call a Mediterranean village, it must probably look like one. And that's the wrong approach. The right approach is to look, and we just use this as an example. You can walk around this campus, you can walk anywhere that you want, and what we're really trying to say is that if it's a good idea, it's a good idea. And don't be so blind as to see that it's falling apart or it's old or the method of transportation is donkeys and how can we possibly understand or use any of it. And even too, when you look at it and you say it's really beautiful, should we take it home and build something that looks like that? That's not. Neither of those are the right approach. The approach is that you're a designer with a sensitivity to your environment, and you go there, and if it's a good idea, it's a good idea. Figure out how to use it in another context. No, because the first thing we learned how to say in Greece was, hello, we are architects, can we come in your house and sketch? And it worked, and everyone let us in, and everyone spent all their time running around finding ouzo and cookies for us. So.
That's great. Yes.
Do you want to answer?
Oh, no. We
only
no.
took the cameras on the sunny days.
Like I said, most of the time when we travel, we try to travel between the months of October and May, because those are when the tourists are not there that much. For instance, on Santorini, for half the time we were there, we were the only two non-Greek speaking people on the entire island. And as far as weather is concerned, during the winter months, it's about 50-50. You have about 50% sunshine, 50% rain and bad weather. So on the bad days, we would stay inside and draw up sections and diagrams and things. But during the sunny days, we would just run out and take advantage of it while we were there. So That's why most of the shots. Plus, we edited down hundreds of thousands of slides down to what you see here. So. Incidentally, while we lived on Santorini, it snowed for the first time in 100 years on the island when we were there.
It was fabulous to wake up and
amazing.
see all that white, even whiter.
Imagine.
It only lasted a few minutes. Are we done?
Okay, if that's all, we can all go into the gallery if that's fine. Thank you. Thank you very much.